Hello everyone. Can you hear me well? Thank you for the feedback. My name is Bengisu Akkurt, and I'm coming from Turkey. I am a very early career researcher in the field of social psychology, and I work as a research assistant at Abdullah Gül University, which is a state university in Turkey. And the topic of my presentation today will be creating and promoting strong positive identities for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and we will also be talking about multiple conflicting identities and people from various kinds of disadvantages backgrounds. Sorry. And as we all know, we are all members of various social groups, and therefore we gain several social identities based on the belongingness to these groups. But why is it so essential for us to feel belonging to a group? Why do we have such a strong need and tendency for this? And social identity theory argues positive social identities are critical for us as they potentially nurture some of our very basic needs, such as self-esteem or self-love. And as affiliation with a group increases self-esteem, it aids in the maintenance of that social identity. And individual social identities are most intact when the membership in a particular group is perceived as central to our self-concept. Besides stronger our emotional attachment to a group, the more influential that group's social identity is. And it's one of the most robust findings of social psychology literature. It is that social identities shape how we perceive ourselves and others, as well as our social perceptions and decisions in various social settings. And from various perspectives, social identities have been one of the most researched topics in the social psychology literature, as they are highly influential on us, both for our personal perception and well-being, as well as our intergroup attitudes and behaviors. And social identity theory states that people strive for achieving a positive distinctiveness for their group membership. And the sense of positive distinctiveness refers here feeling valuable, as well as distinct from other relevant social groups. And it's a motivational explanation regarding the in-group and out-group biases. And first, evaluations about the self as a group member are considered to be related to the outcome of social comparison between the in-group and the relevant out-groups. And second, it is taught that individuals desire a positive self-image and self-esteem. And the positive self-evaluation as a group member can be acquired by making sure that the in-group is positively distinct from the other out-groups. Typically group members engage in social competition with other out-groups in order to positively distinguish their in-group. And according to the theory, the symbolic meaning of the group's position in relation to other groups is a powerful motivating factor. And as a popular example, support teams, fans frequently compare themselves and other sports teams and with opponents, and use positive distinction to boost their team's esteem, collective esteem. And when discussing social identities, the first examples that come to mind are race, ethnicity, gender, social class, sexual orientation, religious, etc. But some of these identities are assigned to us almost at birth, and we have no or limited control over some of them, such as race, biological sex, or age maybe. But the question is, an important question to ask is, would more minimal reasons be enough for us to create social identities? And minimal group paradigm in the social psychology research, it's the methodology that seeks to answer that question And it argues that, it proposes that a minimal condition is enough for creating group biases like favoritism towards your own group and prejudice towards the outgroups, and simply through being a member of a group. And Touchfell, he is like one of the founders of the theory, proposed that the bare minimum for group bias and discrimination to occur was simply being a member of a group, like even if for a very minimal, trivial, and random reason, such as like wearing the same color of t-shirt, for instance. Like even that minimal reasons can create group biases. And like many studies, like using children, youth, or adults as research samples, have found that like even like these minor clues reminding of group membership may affect our like intergroup attitudes and behaviors. And like over several studies, like children as early as 5 years of age have found to be responsive to like minimal group manipulations. We know from the developmental psychology research. And while like most research in this area has like traditionally focused on measuring like in-group favoritism or like social discrimination, there has been an increase in the number of studies that like focus on the more positive effects of the minimal group belonging. For example, like even like minimal positive group memberships were found to increase motivation for some task engagements, task persistence, or like learning in children on a group relevant task. This could be like making puzzle, like answering like mathematical like questions, like conducted in the like developmental psychology research with children. And like for a wide range of reasons, such studies like typically used like STEM tasks. And it's important to study like the ways of promoting engaging like STEM fields, like in childhood, like or in youth, since some young people are more disadvantaged to develop an interest in those areas such as like gender, SES, like motivation level, and develop like family commitment in their education. And if it is possible, like to create like novel group memberships, to create a like positive impact to compensate for their like naturally existing disadvantaged social group memberships, such as like gender, SES, or being a member of an oppressed minority group, it might have a like huge value, especially for children and young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. And even though the like initial motivation for acquiring social identities is to like boost our self-esteem, some of our social identities might result in like negative emotions and dissatisfaction, as we form like negative prejudice for like several social groups. Sometimes we might be the subject for like intense negative prejudice or even discrimination. And social identity theory explains the function of like forming this like negative prejudice as to degrade relevant outgroups, to see the in-group positively more distinct. However, social comparison does not apply the same consequences for everyone. For individuals who are from the more fragile social groups, like this comparison like usually fails to improve the self-concept and even diminishes it. And minority groups and like other socially disadvantaged groups are more vulnerable to negative prejudice and discrimination for various reasons, like immigrants, LGBT groups, racial and religious minorities, for example, and individuals in this position may show like different reactions within their means to raise their self-esteem. Because it's a very basic need and they need to like do something about it, and these reactions may vary a lot. And like one reaction can be like simply leaving the group, or which is called like social mobility in social psychology literature. However, like leaving some social groups such as like race, gender, this can be more complex or challenging. Also, individuals who lack the power and opportunity to change, or who struggle with strong negative like prejudice against their in-group can demonstrate that if it's like too challenging to challenge it, to change it, they may look for like easier ways to like deal with it. And another answer could be getting a distance from the in-group, like it could be a physical or psychological distancing by confirming this like negative prejudice regarding their in-groups. And being constantly exposed to negative prejudice and discrimination in everyday life can be extremely difficult for people with stigmatized identities. And in this case, they may show like out-group favoritism and have an internalized negative prejudice against their in-group, which can be like easier than trying to like change it sometimes. And another reaction might be to like limit their social comparison to groups similar to their own groups. And another response to like social disadvantages is like sidestepping the main dimension of comparison and to either invent new paths or change the value of existing dimensions. And these reactions are considered as expressions of social creativity concept in the social psychology literature. Yet another solution can be like directly confronting the dominant group's superiority, performing activism, asking for equality and rights through social and economic change. And like these two last reactions are my like personal favorites, if you ask me, because like these responses, like which enable minority groups to rise their self-esteem and claim their rights by also like protecting or like redefining their own identities and bring more like positive results for the well-being of people from disadvantaged identities. And furthermore, like these two reactions, including social creativity and social activism, create more like long-term solutions by broadening the field to include more people from disadvantaged groups, by creating a like third way rather than the existing dimensions. And like after providing a brief overview of social identity theory and like social psychology research in this field, I'd like to share some of the like research we have done and the findings we have reached at the Koç Social Identities Lab, of which I am a proud member. And if I need to introduce our lab first, it was formed in like 2018 at the University of Groningen, Netherlands. And I was the lab's first research assistant back then. I went there as a like Erasmus Plus like trainee as a bachelor student. And currently we have like more than 15 members who are in different stages of their academic career and several lab alumni at like other prestigious universities. And as a group, our broader aim is to apply and extend the social identity approach to study disadvantaged groups. And we focus both on minority groups' engagement with like social change processes and on their well-being. And we are particularly interested in how disadvantaged groups navigate their identities through like privileged systems. And the broader questions we are dealing with are how do disadvantaged groups deal with their lower status in different terms? How does society perceive them? And when do advantaged groups support their action, like to improve their status? But like to seek answers for these questions, we use diverse methods, often combining correlational exploratory studies with follow-up experiments, as well as some qualitative research to develop an in-depth understanding of the phenomenon. Although we have like several research tracks at our lab, projects and independent studies, in this presentation I will focus on the first two of our main research tracks, and the first one is on examining multiple conflicting identities. And in this research line we examine what happens when some of our multiple social identities are in conflict with each other by using like bicultural identity integration framework and social identity theory. And we examine the nature of identity conflict and ways to increase integration between multiple conflicting identities. And I will like focus on more examples, and it will be more clear for you after I go on these examples. because like traditionally, like most research on social identity theory dealt with identity like one-dimensionally, like only in terms of like gender, race, age, but it's more common right now like to look at it and examine it more multidimensionally. And as the second track, we investigate the experiences of several disadvantaged groups. Like what happens to disadvantaged group members when they are discriminated? Or do they like stick with their group? Like how would their reaction will be? Like do they try to improve their status by leaving their group? How they are affected by the societal issues? Like focusing on social change and well-being outcomes. And today I'd like to share you some interesting and current research findings, some of which I've been a part of as a researcher, and some of them are conducted by other researchers and students at the lab I am a part of. And the most research in the field of social identity, as I said, like traditional, focused on social identity from a single perspective. However, it's been more recognized for like several researchers right now that we all have like multiple social identities as a result of our nationality, ethnicity, or religion, sexuality, gender, and social status, among like various other things. And there is now increasing recognition that social identities intersect and are not independent of each other. And when multiple social identities intersect, like they can either function harmoniously together or be incompatible with potentially significant negative implications for the well-being of group members and intergroup relations. And in this research track, we aim to investigate the intersection of potentially conflicting social identities across different domains. So far, we have completed studies on feminist Muslim identities, gay male identities, gay father identities, and more studies are being conducted at the moment. And for our research on multiple feminist identity integration and how is it possible, today an increasing number of Muslim women identify themselves as like both Muslim and feminist at the same time. However, Muslim and feminist identities are frequently like viewed as incompatible, but both like Muslim and non-Muslim groups. And Muslim feminist women may face conflict as a result of endorsing both of these two identities strongly. And therefore, we were curious about the factors that could reduce this conflict and predict the integration of Muslim and feminist identities among Muslim women. And we investigated the factors that predict this integration among Muslim women in Turkey using a bicultural identity integration framework. And this framework was formed to address individuals' subjective experiences of like managing like dual identities. And the theory incorporates like two bipolar components of identity integration, and the first one is blendedness versus compartmentalization. And blendedness means like perceived degree of disassociation versus overlap between the cultural orientations, while compartmentalization refers to the degree of tension or like clash versus compatibility between the two cultures. And it's a like critical field of study as like high level of identity integration is found to be associated with various outcomes such as higher self-esteem, lower anxiety, and greater life satisfaction in bicultural individuals. And in recent years, research using this framework went beyond the cultural identities and focused on the applications to different forms of social identities, such as like work and old age, like sexual and gender, sexual and religious identities. And bicultural identity integration framework also recognizes how individuals experience the identity confusion between their incompatible identities and to what extent they manage to respond to the dual expectations like from both sides. And finally, how to negotiate the value clashes caused by the incompatible identities. Because like both communities have like different expectations. And this is not only increases the like stigma associated with like both identities in society, but also creates a like unique pressure. And finally, identity integration can be like seen as a like third emerging culture. This is like where we believe a social identity approach can enhance the bicultural identity integration framework. And in this study, we found that like religiosity was not significantly related to Muslim feminist identity integration, but positive attitudes towards feminism, positive perceptions of feminists, and higher familiarity with other Muslim feminist women, like people who know like examples of like Muslim feminist women, predicted like higher Muslim feminist identity integration. And besides, we found that identity integration like significantly mediated the direct relation between the familiarity with other feminists and collective action tendency. And as the like manipulation, like we gave, it was like study 2. In study 2, we used an experimental design, and we manipulated the like content of the feminist message with a manipulation text by including Islamic or secular references to feminism. And we like gave them like a short text, and which was like defining feminism and giving examples from the like Islamic history. It was like valuing the women, gave the women like those kind of rights, blah blah blah. And like using the almost exact same text, we only refer to more like secular sources or examples of like feminism. And we found that like for women who are less familiarity with Muslim feminist women who does not know about them are affected more by that manipulation, like given like referring the like Islamic source, like supporting feminism affected their like perception more and help to increase their like feminist Muslim identity integration. And overall, these findings provided like novel theoretical advancements in identity integration work and useful insights for like NGOs trying to mobilize Muslim women. And I also forgot to mention, I guess, in both studies, high Muslim feminist identity integration also predicted higher collective action tendencies, like supporting like Muslim feminist women. And I will like talk about another study we worked at our lab. And belonging to like multiple and incompatible identities has been linked to negative psychological outcomes, such as like feelings of guilt and shame. And individuals who are confronted with such conflict can employ a variety of strategies to reconcile like seemingly incompatible identities. And the purpose of this study was to investigate identity integration as a protective factor against guilt and shame for people who identify as both religious and gay. And the data is like from Austria and Turkey here. And we found that religious identification predicted higher levels of religious-based guilt and both gay identity-based guilt and shame. On the contrary, gay identification was not associated with any feelings of guilt and shame, and identity integration like predicted lower levels of all guilt and shame outcomes and also moderated the relationship between religious identification, guilt and shame as well. And in brief, religious gay identity integration decreased the negative effects independently associated with religious identification. And like these findings suggest that like gay people may be able to like reap the protective benefits of religious engagement and like multiple group memberships while remaining connected to the gay community through identity integration. Because we have like examples that they feel excluded from like both sides, like both excluded from the most of the religious people and most of the secular gay people. And reconciling religious beliefs with a sexual minority identity can be very challenging. After coming out, many gay men report to have renounced their religious identity or experienced increased identity conflict between their religious and sexual identities. And giving up one's own identity or identity conflict are known to predict negative well-being outcomes for those people. And it's important to find ways to reduce this conflict and increase their identity integration. And in this experiment, we conceptualized identity integration as a social creativity strategy. And we examined whether social acceptance and in-group experience, whether a gay community feels stability or improvement about their status, would alter one's level of Muslim gay identity integration. And what we found is that Muslim gay identity integration was highest among highly religious gay men when social acceptance was present and in-group experience was stable. And we argue that identity integration can be seen as a new social creativity strategy, whereby individuals try to negotiate their conflicting dual identities. Instead of focusing on conflicting dimensions, Muslim gay men might redefine comparison dimensions between the two identities and alter the importance of each identity attributes to create a new third culture. And the process of redefining and altering the importance could be a novel coping strategy, and creating this third culture could be as the outcome of this process. And currently, there has been greater social acceptance of homosexuality within Western cultures. However, those who identify as members of more than one minority group continue to face prejudice and discrimination, including homophobia and racism. And in this experiment, 38 sexual minority British Muslim South Asian men were recruited via snowball sampling and interviewed. And despite increased work on the experiences of sexual minority people of color, there is a gap in the literature on the experiences of sexual minority British Muslim South Asian men and the integration of sexual minority and religious identities. And we evaluated their experiences particularly in the context of increased social acceptance of social minorities, as well as the existence of social Islamophobia. And the respondents' experiences revealed significant social exclusion as a result of intersectional disadvantage, as well as a lack of intra-community social support, from both sides. And social exclusion creates a major isolation for this group of people, and adverse psychological consequences, and a general avoidance of identity affiliation based on their sexual attraction. And the results has important implications for identity-based services, which may potentially exclude the needs of hidden and intersectionally disadvantaged populations, as well as organizations working for and with young people. And a significant portion of the research we conduct at the Social Identities Lab focuses on the experiences of disadvantaged groups, including experiences of discrimination, their social mobility, coping strategies, and reactions. And stereotypes typically have negative impacts on stigmatized minority groups, especially when endorsed by members of that group. And in this study, we examined the prevalence and consequences of stereotype endorsement on well-being within the gay community. And in this study, we specifically explored how gay men self-stereotype and meta-stereotype, believing that out-group members endorse stereotypes pertaining to one's in-group. And self and meta-stereotype endorsements will be related to mental and cognitive well-being. And we found evidence that our sample endorse both self and meta stereotypes about their gender identity, with like meta stereotypes being endorsed more strongly than self stereotypes. And the analysis revealed a unique pattern of findings that like increase in self-stereotyping like predicted decrease in mental health and well-being, whereas increase in like meta-stereotyping predicted decrease in cognitive well-being. And mental well-being here was assessed through depression, anxiety, and stress, and cognitive well-being was conceptualized as like life satisfaction and self-worth. And in this study, we examined the mechanisms by which in-group identification impacts well-being in stigmatized groups. And studies were conducted among like gay people in Europe and North America. And among gay people in Europe, identification with homosexuals appears to protect well-being among gay people by decreasing their self-group distancing. And identification was related to engagement coping strategies such as collective action, group affirmation, and in-group support, but not to disengagement strategies like in-group blaming and avoidance of discrimination. And we also looked at these mechanisms in Black Americans, and again, identification was positively related to engagement coping and negatively related to disengagement. However, like only collective action predicted well-being. And the findings suggest that the effectiveness of like various coping strategies against stigma varies depending on the intergroup context. And in this study, we investigated whether and how the experience of like being tolerated and being discriminated against are associated with psychological well-being. And this correlational study conducted with participants from Turkey among like 3 stigmatized groups: LGBT group members, people with disabilities, and ethnic Kurds. And results showed evidence for the detrimental role of both toleration and discrimination experiences on positive and negative psychological well-being through higher levels of threatened social identity needs. And a meta-analysis also showed that toleration was associated with lower positive well-being through threatened needs among all 3 stigmatized groups. And this will be the final study I will like overview today. And in most parts of the world, like hegemonic masculinity expects men to endorse like traditional masculine ideals, like one of which is rejection of homosexuality. And therefore, like gay males may feel under pressure to negotiate their conflicting male gender and gay sexual identities to maintain a positive self-perception. However, like globalization as a source of intercultural interaction might provide a beneficial context for people wishing to create alternative masculinities in the face of hegemonic masculinity. So we tested if global identification would predict higher levels of gay male identity integration, and indirectly their subjective well-being via like alternative masculinity representations. And looking at the findings, priming with like pro-globalization worldviews increased gay people's identification as global citizens, and this indirectly led to higher gay male identity integration. And identity integration in turn predicted higher subjective well-being. And this study highlights the importance of an intersectional approach to studying social identities by like showing how the compatibility of 2 social identities can be increased by adopting a 3rd social identity. Like, although like most of the studies I've talked about today did not have like research samples of like young people, we have some like tips to like learn about the findings. And like to sum up, when our social identities begin to feel more negative than positive, or when we like possess multiple conflicting identities, These basic needs are not met adequately, and therefore our need for like self-esteem and self-love. Therefore, it's essential for like young people to develop social identities that like nourish and strengthen them, allowing them to feel good about themselves and use their full potential to benefit both their like personal growth and as well as the society. And like youth work in general and like Erasmus Plus platforms in particular has like powerful tools and resources like to be a hub for this development and creating a safe space for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I believe like youth work might create a ground that supports social creativity of young people by like being sensitive about their like needs of potentially hidden intersectionally disadvantaged social groups. Besides, it might provide an atmosphere for endorsing activist and like volunteer identities, which in turn can promote their like personal development and increase their motivation for social change. Another outcome of this would be the improvement of their self-esteem, like personal self-esteem as well, in a way that prioritizing like their well-being, like finally establishing like social group norms as inclusive as possible, like would allow more young people from varied disadvantageous backgrounds to feel the belongingness. And thank you a lot for your time and attention today.